And then it can lead to churn, where I mentioned where you can like push stuff into progress, but then you push it back in the to-do list. Some of that can lead into sort of like a thrashing on tasks where you can move it forward just a little bit, but then you're blocked, and then you have to push it back, and then you have to document everything, and then you go push it forward a little bit, and then it's back. A lot of times that has to do with improperly sized tasks, but there are other things that can lead to that as well. So we've talked about some pros, we've talked about some cons. So some of the things to think about when you are choosing your approach, should I do sprints? Should I do Scrum? Should I do sprint Scrum, or should I do maybe Kanban? One of the things I've mentioned now a couple of times, is this a new product, or is this more like a maintenance enhancements kind of approach or team? If it's a new product, then your backlog is a little more static. I guess it really isn't, but it's like it feels more static, because with a new product, the way that thing is growing is it's because you've got designers and product owner and stuff like that, and even feedback from your customers that you're using to get to whatever that end product goal is. And along the way, you're having these sprints. So with each sprint, you just sort of, push some stuff in, you go work on it. And the things that are in the backlog while you're working on a sprint are things to continue moving forward and enhance that product. So they are, in effect, while there are priorities, they technically could sit there until product completion. It could be, those could be what, like, you could early on put in a task that ends up being the absolute last task that you complete before you say, okay, the product's done. If you're doing maintenance and enhancements, if you're doing especially more maintenance, I guess, and bug fixes, but also enhancements where you're getting that regular stream from your customers, then you're going to get stuff on a regular basis that maybe are going to want to bump priority. Defect and bugs and defects are famous for that, where you get into something where it's like, oh, we put a release out and we're looking ahead for the next month of development, and somebody comes in with something, it's like, oh, this is critical, this has to be dealt with now. This is, we've got half our users can't use our application. If it's a sprint or something like that, then yeah, you could always like step outside of your sprint, and that's usually what happens. But if it's, that's going to be more suitable to Kanban, because you say, okay, who we got available today? Let's work on the tasks to get that critical fix in place. The next thing is, think about is your team skilled or novice, in particular with the world, within the world of Agile? Because as I said, it's not simple. It may seem simple on the surface of it, but actually being comfortable with doing development in either of these environments can be a bit of a challenge. Kanban tends to be a little easier to step into, because you don't have to think through sprints and all of the different things around those. Instead, it's basically like, oh, I just go to a board and I grab a task I'm going to work on. So you don't have to understand the process really at all. All you need to know is go to the board, find something to do, pick it, move it to the end progress, and then when you're done, move it to the done column. And that's it. You don't have to get much more complicated than that. And then just say, like, and when you're done, you go pick another task. So depending on your team's experience in the Agile world, it may, that will maybe shift you towards, hey, we can do sprints, or we just need to do Kanbans for now. What's the backlog size? If you're building out something that's, huge, Kanban may not be a good fit. As I mentioned, that's one of those weaknesses where it could be, with that sprint Scrum approach, you could have a huge, incredible backlog of stories and epics and all that kind of stuff. And it never really becomes as much a problem, because when you move into a sprint, you're basically taking, like an epic or a story or some theme of tickets, and you sort of move those in. And that's really the product owner, really the scrum master, is doing those pieces of work. And so the development team it's just picking from the sprint work as opposed to having to sort through the entire backlog. Team availability is something. Now there's tools now that make it easier to do like daily stand-ups, even if you've got a team that's all the way around the globe. However, it's hard to do that because it ends up being that certain, team members have to adjust their schedule. They have to, it's really hard to find the right time to do that. If you've got developers essentially running, 24/7 or even 5 days a week, but, roughly 24 hours a day while they're doing that, is getting the benefit out of a stand-up. So your sprint, because of the, sprints drive you to have a lot of that communication and interaction. If that's difficult to do, then it may be that it's easier to use Kanban and to keep it much more granular, so you don't have to have as much communication within your team. Sort of similar to the new product versus maintenance and enhancements and defects is the priorities. If you know that the tasks you're working on are the tasks that you're going to want to be working on for the next couple of weeks, during that, whatever that sprint length is, then you're great. But if you have to worry whether your priorities are going to change daily, and there are some organizations that's how it works, then you're probably going to be better off doing, Kanban, because you could actually come in and you could have everything planned out and say, okay, this is what I'm working on today. This is what the team's working on. We've got everything in progress. Halfway through the day, priorities change, and everybody said, okay, we're going to push everything back to the backlog, and we have this new set of tasks we're doing, and you're off and running. So you can be very flexible in adjusting priorities. I mean, people talk about, pivots and stuff like that. If you pivot every day or you pivot on a regular basis, while it can be frustrating, at least Kanban will allow you to adapt to that better. And then there are some ways that you can look at stuff and sort of choose both of them. So, maybe you have like essentially a Kanban board. Each sprint, it sort of gets reset, and you filter in initially, some of your tasks that you're going to do during that sprint. But then you have the ability to just throw tasks into that at any given time. So maybe you have like that sprint backlog, as opposed to you've got the full product backlog, you've got your sprint backlog. And maybe within a sprint, you treat it as more of a Kanban approach, where it's just like, just grab something, work on it. And in that situation, you may not have as tight a scope or theme or story for a given sprint, but that's also basically, you just go into it saying, hey, we all agree that we can't stay heads down for whatever the sprint length that, for 2 weeks, for 4 weeks. We have to be able to adapt and pull in new tasks very quickly. And so you may have to look at doing some sort of a blended approach. All right, questions and comments.
So, Rob, in this particular approach, when you're dealing with like new teams or essentially established teams that then add new people, if you're in a typical sprint mode, does sometimes switching to a Kanban mode for the new people, I've had mixed on this, because one of the problems we've run into with the sprint approach is the new people pick up tickets initially, may take them a couple of sprints to get, brought up to speed, complete the tickets. But then once they get up to speed, then all of a sudden, maybe the tickets are being completed way too soon. So we have to pull additional tickets in from the backlog, which for a while is fine. And eventually it balances out. But what's your take on that?
That's actually something I didn't mention, but is a good point. Is part of the challenge of sprints is if you bring on new resources, then you really, it's configured in a way that people need to join and leave the team within the sprint structure. So it is very helpful where people's like first day on the team would be coincide with the start of a sprint. Their last day would coincide with the end of a sprint. And I've worked with organizations where that's my start date was strictly tied to, a sprint. And so if something happens and you miss that first day, then maybe something we're like, okay, well, we'll just wait to the next sprint to add a resource. And it has to be prefaced with that as well, so the people that are planning out the sprint can understand what kind of resources they have. Now, the idea of having like a Kanban board that would be this would be like a combo approach, is that maybe you have sprints and you pull stuff into a sprint, but you separately have a Kanban team or a Kanban board that is just like, hey, this is outside of a sprint. And it is a way to tackle things that are adjusting priorities. So you may have something where we're zigging and zagging our way through on a product, but we also have this separate maybe Kanban backlog of things that we're going to get to it when we can get to it. And you can use that sometimes if if somebody's going to take a sprint off, maybe you have like somebody that's normally a sprint part of that sprint approach, that sprint team, that maybe you say, okay, you're going to sit out for this next one, and you're going to do more like the enhancements or bug fixing or things like that. And sometimes it's things like documentation tasks or research or catching up tests, building out some additional regression or unit tests that we've missed along the way. Those things may be the things that, and just technical debt in general. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to say, okay, here's our sprints and our primary backlog and our primary work we're doing. But as we generate technical debt, we're going to have this Kanban board. And as we bring new people in, it may be perfect for, them to pick up some of those tasks. If we have somebody that's, going to miss, like, because for example, like if you got a 2-week sprint and somebody's got a week vacation in there, maybe it doesn't make sense for them to have any part of the sprint. And instead you can shift them over and they do Kanban work for that week that they're there. It does allow you to, and I think if you use that as part of rolling on new individuals, you can actually throw stuff out into that Kanban board that are tasks that are like orientation and introductory tasks. Now, I've done it where we had sprints sort of that we were focused on with a team that I'm working with. And what we would do is there was this, really, it was closer to like a Kanban board approach where it's like, here's a list of tasks that you need to do and just start working your way through those. And they were separate from, they were part of onboarding and separate from the sprint. And then once we got them to a point where they were comfortable, then we could roll them into a sprint. And before that, it's stuff where it's like, there was always those core tasks were like, well, we need you to understand these things, to read this or to review that or to set this account up, all of those must-haves for onboarding. And then we would have other stuff where it's like, hey, if you've gotten this far, then take a look, maybe here's some tasks that you can do that would help us out. And so having like a Kanban feed in or feed out approach to sprints may be a really good way to go. Is it's, take that stuff that's lower priority, that's nice to haves, or stuff that just never seems to make its way into a regular sprint, like technical debt, push that into a Kanban board and then bring people in and say, here you go, you can help us out with that. And particularly because like documentation and testing and some of that sometimes are the technical debt kinds of things that are sitting around. Sometimes those are perfect for people that are new to come in, and it forces them to really get to know the product a little bit better because they've got a clear objective, something they need to learn, something they need to do or whatever, some sort of deliverable that really helps pull them into the team.
All right. So that I like that. Now, here's a second scenario. So if you were to take an existing like monolith application that continues to need support, but then you need to break it out into a new application, or at least start breaking up the core components. Would you keep that in sprint, or kind of break it into both, or just switch to a Kanban model?
I have seen typically what I've seen and what I think works pretty well is that you have that's where you do split it. So your new, we'll call it new development, but you're, creating that new version of the product lives in a sprint. But then, and particularly like if you're going from like 1.0 to 2.0, as you put all the 2.0 stuff into sprints and you're really focusing on that. So the people that are in the sprints are not distracted by bugs and fixes for version 1.0 and patches. And then separately, now you can do, I've seen it done where you also have you have like new product sprints and you have maintenance sprints, which you can do that, but sometimes it's a lot easier to have the new product sprints and then the maintenance Kanban, because then it's just, because you're not always sure what the level of work is that you're going to have for some of that maintenance and enhancement and bug fixes. Sometimes it's easier to do it in a Kanban approach where you just say, okay, we're going to just like keep working until we have enough stuff in the development, in the done queue, that we're going to say, okay, we're going to do a point release. And we can always release stuff like individually. We may do like a, ticket here, a ticket there, because it's so high priority. But generally speaking, we're just going to we're not going to bother with a release, an update, or a point release until we get a certain number of features that are in that done. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it's not, because your customers are pushing to get those things done. But particularly if you're doing like sunsetting a product or end of life, it may be one of those where you're saying, hey, if it's something that we really want to push into the new software, then maybe it's something where you say, hey, we're not even going to do it here. We'll just take this, and it's not going to be in our Kanban approach. It's going to be over in our sprint approach. So that's another good place where sometimes you'll see that diversion. So maybe as you go through version 1.0, it's all sprints. But then once you complete or release version 1.0, you have a Kanban approach to track all of the bugs and bug fixes and point releases, and your new development ends up living in sprints. And it does really help the sprint team, because sprint teams can get really frustrated if they constantly have these new things that are punted into their sprint, and now they've got to drop stuff. They've got a different set of priorities, and they're not able to think in that sprint mode. They're instead really forced to scramble a little bit and constantly make adjustments. And so it's a great way to do it, is have two, because it's two different needs as software development, is to take the two different approaches.
Cool. Thanks, Rob.
Other questions or comments?
Hey, my other question is isn't it so hard to hold, everybody accountable in the Kanban sprints, because since they don't have end dates whereby, okay, maybe we did sprint one, because Kanban just keeps continuing, and I've seen whereby we just continue taking tasks still, and you can see days on them whereby that we have had them on board for a long time. Isn't it so hard running Kanban when you have a bigger team?
I don't think so, because if you do it, if you track who has worked on tasks, then Kanban works really well, because you can look at, you'll probably periodically, clean out the done. So you can sort of do it from maybe every week. You do everything for a week, and stuff gets moved into done.
Yeah.
And then after that, you can, if you're a manager, you look at it and say, okay, well, I'm going to sort of look and see who did what this week. And if something sits in progress for a long period of time, then that becomes its own little, red flag where you look to it and say, hey, hey, Michael, you've been sitting on this task for a week. We didn't think it was going to take that long. What's going on? What can, are you blocked? Is there something that you need, some help you need? What is it that we can do to get that thing, moving forward? And if it is somebody that's just, grabs it and sits on it, then at least there's that, you do have that accountability where it's like, hey, you've been on that for a couple of days. That should be done. So get off your butt and get the work done. So it is, I think it's more flexible for the manager to be able to manage that, as they can either look to see that people are constantly, have something to do. They can look to see if things are taking too long. They can look to see if people are just not getting things done as fast as they expect them to.
Yeah. Okay.
And it allows people as well, because there may be tickets that are difficult, that are complex, and other ones that are very easy. And that's another thing, is you can sort of watch and see, is somebody always cherry picking like the easy stuff? Is it, is there somebody that's not pushing themselves, or you say, hey, you're picking a lot of easy tasks. I've seen you're completing all these things that I think are beneath you. I think you need to stretch yourself a little bit more. There's things like that you can do within that. That I think it gives you, Kanban, I think, gives you a lot of flexibility as a manager to drive your team the way you want to. Good question, though.
Okay. So what would be your personal preference? I mean, this is the first time I've worked on the Kanban project, so I've always been either strictly Scrum Agile. So do you have any preference when it comes to?
I really don't. I think there's a value in both of them. Personally, I do personal sprints and have for years and years now that I have. I mean, it's not really Scrum, because it doesn't really focus, I don't have a big enough team. It's just me. But I do within that have the idea of, I sort of do a quick review and sort of a retrospective, maybe not every sprint, but probably, every couple of sprints. Okay. And it allows me, and I could do that with Kanban. But just with the sprint, it gives me it's just easier for me. In that case, it's easier for me to manage how fast am I getting stuff done? How much should I expect that I'm going to get done in the next, sprint period, which I do like 2 weeks. So what is it that I should expect based on history to be able to get done in the next couple of weeks? I could do that with Kanban. It's just sprints for me are much more, it reminds me, regularly. It's like, hey, you've got a new sprint. So take a look at what you got done. Take a look at what you need to load your backlog up, and you need to adjust priorities. But I've been in a lot of situations where Kanban is much, much easier to deal with. And the overhead that is involved with sprint just doesn't work, because the team is not that kind of a team. So it really does come down to what the project is and what the team's like, as far as which is for me, which I prefer.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. So what do we learn? Hopefully, or maybe we already knew this. Kanban and Scrum are both options for an agile approach to software development. As you would expect, there are strengths and weaknesses to each of these. The right or the best approach really is going to vary by team and project, and what are your goals? What are your priorities? And more importantly, which is, I think, one of the keys to Agile in general, is it's flexible. It is Agile, and you can combine them. We've talked, especially even in the Q&A session, we've talked about a couple different ways here that you can combine these, that you can find the strengths and the weaknesses, and use the strengths of both where they're best, and avoid them where they're weak. Use the other approach. And that brings us to the end of this. So I want to thank you again for your time. As always, appreciate the time that you spend working on becoming a better developer. There are plenty of ways you can get a hold of us. info@developernerd.com for email. We have a contact us form out on developernerd.com. We have a YouTube channel. We've got the Developerpreneur Vimeo channel. YouTube, if you go search for Developerpreneur, DEVELPRENEUR, you will be able to see where our channel is. And we've got now, I think, probably, we're well over 100 different YouTube, typically 15 to 30 minute type videos that are out there. Multiple, I think we've got up to about a dozen different channels, sort of like focused topics, and those crank out much like the podcast when it's live, twice a week. Vimeo, you can see some of the longer form stuff, including some of these Ventor sessions. We have a Facebook page, Developerpreneur, and Developerpreneur out on twitter.com. Definitely follow us there, and we do regular multiple times a day. We've got both links to some of our content, but also various news sites that we follow and some cool information that's out there. As always, we're just doing this because our goal is to make every developer better, and appreciate the time that you invest in yourself to make yourself better with these kinds of presentations. Thank you and have a good day.